Welcome to Living Fully, a Calgary Counseling Centre podcast. Each episode, we'll bring you insights from our expert counselors and tips and strategies to improve your mental well-being. I'm your host, Katherine Hurtig. Calgary Counseling Centre and Counseling Alberta provide effective counseling for anyone in Alberta with no waitlist and no financial barriers. Find us online at calgarycounseling.com or counselingalberta.com. In this episode, I talk with registered social worker Nicole Ward about the stress that parents and kids can face when headed into the back-to-school season. Nicole talks about the different ways that stress and anxiety can show up for kids and parents, and provides strategies and techniques to make the back-to-school transition a bit easier. So I know we're in the middle of summer, but fall will sneak up on us before we know it. And for a lot of families, that's going to mean going back to the routine of school. So today we're going to talk about back to school stress and what parents and kids can do to ease back into the routine. So I'm here today with Nicole Ward, a registered social worker with Calgary Counseling Centre. Hi, Nicole. Thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Katherine.
Let's start out by, just telling me a bit about yourself and your background.
I'm a registered social worker, as you said, and a counselor at Calgary Counseling Centre. My whole clinical background has been with children and families mostly. I have two small children myself, a 10-year-old girl and a 6-year-old little boy. So this topic of handling back to school stress is near and dear to my heart, for sure.
For sure. You can definitely relate. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, let's get into it. So, Nicole, can you explain some typical sources of back to school stress for children and parents?
Yeah, I think it's mostly the routine, the change in routine, and then that's coupled with everybody's anxiety is a little higher. While parents won't be necessarily changing jobs, let's face it, they're significantly impacted by the transition for their kids and their routines. So back to packing lunches and trying to remember when you have to send your child to school in a pink shirt. All those pieces can contribute to the overall stress of the family unit, whatever that looks like.
Right. Any change in routine, right?
Totally. Yeah. I think the change in routine and just the morning of the end of summer and all the joy that brings.
So how can parents recognize maybe signs of stress in their children as they prepare to go back to school?
I would say if they see or hear a lot of questions about what back to school is going to be like, can be a sign that anxiety is kind of bubbling up for their child. Maybe they're asking what their teacher's going to be like, who might be in their class, what their school's going to be like if it's new, who's going to be picking them up, some reassurance about exactly where they're going to be picked up and what time. I would say all of those kinds of questions coming up, and parents will typically see that as the child starts to cognitively process this change that's going to be happening. If you think about times when, as an adult, you're anxious, it might be about something in the future. And those questions are a way to soothe ourselves and have some certainty about an unanswerable question, which is exactly what back to school is going to be for kids. Is we're not going to have those answers. But for kids, they rely on their caregivers to answer those unanswerable questions.
Right.
Because, they're largely not in control of their own universe. So.
Yeah. And I guess there is a lot of unknowns going back, like whether you're starting school for the first time or going back, even just a different grade, there are a lot of unknowns, and that can be, upsetting. Nicole, what are some effective strategies for helping kids kind of manage their own back to school anxiety?
I think the biggest piece is normalizing that feeling of anxiety. You can share, in a really general sense, about how you felt at the same age when you were returning to school and what that felt like for you. At the same time, we don't want to give our kids more content to worry about. So telling them about your current worries as a parent might not be that helpful. So talking in generalities, normalizing it, and validating their feelings. And also talking about the physiological reality of anxiety in all of our human bodies. When we're anxious, it's just a very linear and biological process. The physiological responses in the body that we don't need right now to deal with the situation we have at hand, if it's not an emergency, can cause these anxious feelings and realities. Like increased heart rate, our breathing rate can change. We can feel a little bit tingly, and kids don't know really what to make of all that sometimes. And parents can explain this in a child-friendly way, an age-appropriate way. Mm-hmm. So just normalizing that this is a system that we need, and but also explaining just what it is. So the amygdala gets activated, and then there's a stress response, and that stress response creates all kinds of reactions in the body. And we need this stress response because it's the same response that will allow us to hit the brakes on our car, or if we're a kid, hit the brakes on our bike so we don't end up in a ditch, you know? At the same time, it can be a bit tricky because it's an alarm system for our bodies. And when we get anxious, it's almost like a false alarm is going off. The idea is to get back to the front part of our brain, because that's where we can think about thoughts and feelings and mix those together. And it's a more logical place to operate from. And I think later we'll talk more about how to get to this part of the brain when we talk about mindfulness and grounding and whatnot. So
thank you for explaining that, like the physiological side of it. I find how the brain works. And when it comes to mental health, I find that so interesting.
Yeah. And honestly, I think it's just when we can accept the reality that if we have a human brain, then this is how it's going to work. If we have a brain at all, actually, in most animals, it's the same type of system, maybe less evolved, but the same idea. So
yeah, we're all going to experience some level of anxiety at some point. This topic is, it's definitely front of my mind lately because I have a stepson. He's awesome. Shout out to Harrison. And he's 12, and he's going to be going into junior high. So, I mean, personally, I've got my own anxieties for him. But yeah, like there's just so many changes there. Like a completely different school. Now he's got to get himself to and from school. There's going to be like just a completely different structure. So I don't know, what tips do you have for me? Like, how can I set him up for success?
I think having your own support network around processing those feelings, because it wouldn't be helpful for him to know like that you're worried that maybe he'll get bullied or maybe he won't fit in at school, or maybe he won't be cool as, socially. So all of those worries might be things that he didn't even think about. So having a support network, if there's a co-parent, of course, and that's a good resource for sure. Also friends and family members, just normalizing your worries will allow you to be a more solid base.
Yeah, I'm excited for him, but definitely, like, I remember what starting junior high was like, and I feel like junior high was, I would say, the most challenging time. High school is fine, elementary is fine, but junior high is just...
Yeah, there's so much change happening outside and inside. And
it's true,
that's totally exacerbated by things like social media and social pressures and all the things that we didn't maybe contend with as much when we were younger.
I'm really happy that I grew up in a time without social media.
Me too.
You touched on this a little bit, but let's dive deeper. How can parents effectively manage their own stress during the back to school period to make sure that they're, supporting their children?
That stress response is the same whether you're a little person or a bigger person. So it's the taking care of yourself, grounding techniques. Socially, there's so much pressure about like being the perfect parent or being a really good parent, and it looks like everybody else is doing it better than you sometimes. So understanding that that's not true. Take it from me. I probably look like a very different parent on social media than what my kids see at 7 a.m., So I think just being kind to yourself. And if there is a situation where things don't go well in the morning, or anytime. The biggest thing is not the rupture that happens between parent and child, but the repair. I think statistically, if we have a good chance of raising well-balanced children if we get it right 30% of the time.
Oh, that seems realistic.
Yeah, exactly. We can aim a bit higher, but really like aim high and hope for the best. So if we manage that 70% on average of ruptures that happen when things didn't go perfectly by addressing it with our children, apologizing and repairing that and letting them see that we too are human.
Yeah, I definitely don't think I'm a perfect parent either, but I'm very conscious and try to do that a lot with Harrison. Like I will, I'll get frustrated or I'll nag him too much or something. And then I can look back and be like, okay. And then I go to him and I'm like, I'm sorry, dude. Like that was too much, or I shouldn't have said that, or shouldn't have raised my voice. So I hope that's helping him.
Statistically, it is helping him. I don't know Harrison, but all the research says it is. So good job.
Yay.
I think the piece that I also really want parents to lean into, I think it's hard when there's so much coming at parents to think about being able to prioritize ourselves sometimes and thinking that might be a little bit selfish, but you will show up better for your kids if you have your basic and connection and emotional needs met.
Of course.
If you can think about it like that, it kind of takes off some of the pressure of thinking that you don't have time for that, or if that's time you should be putting into your kids. You'll show up better for your kids more often if you have those needs met. Not every time,
right,
but more times.
Are there specific techniques or activities that can help children relax and reduce stress before the school year?
Like, for example, some grounding techniques. I'll go through a few here right now. I think we're going to talk maybe more about those, but maybe this is a good opportunity. One anxiety specific strategy would be to externalize the anxiety. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So kids get taken over by anxiety, and adults too. And we feel this sense of that this is like the whole thing. This is the whole story. And really, when we can look at it in retrospect, it's a very small part of the story. And honestly, the things that we worry about, the percentage of them that actually come to fruition are few and far between, I would say.
Right.
That as soon as you start to feel those physiological changes, and you can talk to your kid about that, like, what does it feel when you start to worry about school? Where do you feel it in your body? Do you feel like a tightness right here? That's a really common one. Do your fingers feel tingly? Here's why. Your body's pumping blood to different parts of your body so you can respond to a real emergency, but this is not one of those emergencies. But everybody feels this way. So being able to have some fun with it, and maybe even give the anxiety a name, like maybe it's an annoying TV character, I'm not sure, but maybe don't pick someone that you love, that like their name, but like Bob, I can feel you coming up, Bob. Like you're trying to trick me. You're trying to make me think there's an emergency, Bob, but there's no emergency.
Okay. So really like separating that from themselves. Like it's something. Yeah.
Yeah. Separating. And once you start to do that cognitive piece of like thinking through what to say to Bob, you'll automatically go to the front part of your brain, which is what you need. That's where you need to be to start to think more logically and get yourself off that spiral that is rumination and repeated thoughts coming up when you're trying to, like, there's nothing to figure out. There's no answer to this. And leaning into anxious feelings while managing it as one part of a really complex system of things that are going on for kids and adults.
We talked about some of the like origin of the stress of going back to school is, the uncertainty, the unknown. How can parents help kids kind of deal with that? Because that's going to happen all the time. That you're always going to face things that you can't predict. What are some things that the parents can do to help their kids better cope with uncertainty?
I think there's some very practical things and then there's behaviors, right? So like fidget toys are actually really good. They offer the kind of like physiological motions that require you to be in the right part of your brain for logical thinking.
Yeah.
Also, like grounding techniques like that will just focus the brain on something else. So, for example, saying, what are 5 things you can see in the room when you start to feel those feelings? What are 4 things that you can touch in the room? You know, what are, like, pay attention. What are 3 things you can hear? What are 2 things you can smell? And what's something you can taste in the room? So just bringing them back to their bodies and 5 senses is a good, simple one for kids. There are many. So also like box breathing. So looking at like a square in the room and sort of taking a deep breath in along one side of the square and then holding it and then letting it out for the same count on the other side of the square and then holding breath again. That's a loose explanation of it, but it's easy to find.
Yeah, that's that one I'm familiar with. I like how that can, that can work for anyone, for kids and adults.
Totally. And I think it's once you understand what's happening, there's so many possibilities. Some people are more cognitive, like they want to use their brains more to get back to the right part of their brain, and some people are more physical. But the trick is, and the thing about this stress response is that it's very powerful, but it doesn't have that many tricks up its sleeve. Like it's kind of the same process every time when you are in that loop. So the quicker you can identify that you're headed down that anxiety path and change directions, the more success you will have. I think the other piece of like techniques and strategies is, setting aside an amount of time where you just talk generally about feelings, and sometimes anxious feelings might come up, but kids knowing they have that daily outlet is really good. Like maybe before bed, that quiet time is when the mind starts to travel away from us a bit sometimes. And also, like journaling is really good for kids who are a bit older and have those skills, or having a parent journal with a kid. Routine ways to normalize all types of feelings.
What about kind of the social challenges? Can you provide some advice on how parents can help their kids navigate peer pressure and things like that during the back to school period?
Yeah, I think, like, for example, this year, the school actually offered a webinar on cyber awareness for parents. So I think that's really important because that is a way that keeps our kids so connected. And monitoring that to whatever age appropriate extent, like your kid in terms of maybe how much that monitoring needs to happen based on prior experience, or just knowing how connected your kid is in those ways.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest part is knowing that if your child brings something to you, that it's going to be responded to in an open and calm way. Also, maybe getting in touch with the school about what trends, they're seeing. And if you know something, even if your kid isn't involved, maybe letting the school know that that's happening. Because some of that stuff happens, through school email, and parents might not even know how their kids are accessing that, right? So,
okay, you're talking about like cyberbullying and things like that.
Yeah, cyberbullying or just inappropriate communication in general.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the biggest piece is having that person at home or people at home that the kid knows that they'll have support navigating the tough parts of this reality that this social reality that we're in right now.
Right. How can parents strike a good balance between supporting their child, guiding them, but also allowing them to develop resilience and independence?
It's a good question, because I think historically we thought, the more independent, the better. And we're learning now that that's actually not that true, that the most important part is that attachment piece, right? The reciprocity that occurs between children and their caregivers. So that children seeing and developing an image of themselves through the way they're responded to by their parents is the most important piece. So I think a dialogue around this is really important. It's not going to go perfectly for the parent or the kid, but setting age appropriate expectations. I'll give you an example. So my kids will always leave their clothes on the bathroom floor after bath time or shower time, every time. And it's so easy for me. And I actually did it for a while to pick it up and just deal with it. But then there's no consistency around the expectations that they're both old enough to get their clothes from the bathroom into the laundry. Next step is telling them to like take their underwear out of their pants first before they put it in. But we're still working on the bathroom floor. So I think it's, taking the time now and knowing that the long-term gains will help you and the kid. So it might be a bit more work tonight, but if it doesn't happen 10 more times because you called them back tonight, then perfect. Also making mistakes is going to be a part of learning. Apologizing to your kid when you make a mistake so they can see that is a part of learning and that you're human just like they are, I think is critical.
Okay. So Nicole, obviously, a big part of school is, the academics, the schoolwork, the studying. Do you have any specific strategies or approaches that can help parents and children manage those academic pressures and expectations?
Yeah, I think the biggest piece is getting the routine down early. Like, I don't think anybody ever looked back on their high school career and thought, I wish I hadn't established better study routines. Like, because as the grades go by, and I'm seeing this now as we're heading into grade 6 here, and I'm sure you're noticing with Harrison, is that it tends to get more intense and the study habits need to be more refined as they get older.
For sure. Yeah.
And then that'll be true even if they sort of sail through the traditional 12 grades of school. It'll be true for post-secondary. One thing I didn't know actually until this year is that a lot of schools and a lot of teachers will allow a student to rewrite a test if they had a bad day or they were feeling anxious that day, if there's that communication back and forth. So if that's asked for, and sometimes it's readily offered, if they, correct the mistakes on their prior test and then are willing to attend a little tutorial, that's offered to a lot of students, especially as they get up into the higher elementary grades. Teachers are really good at communicating now. Keeping in touch with that as a parent can really help while instilling the idea that it really is the kid's responsibility, but it is available to the parent too to help the kiddo stay on track.
One thing that made me think of when I was growing up, obvious, and I'm sure it's still the case with a lot of parents. I did feel this pressure from my parents to get good grades. Obviously, they wanted me to have success. They wanted me to, get into a good school, get a good job, have a good life, whatever. But I felt it might have been maybe too much. Like, I felt that, if I didn't get a certain grade, like that disappointment or I wasn't good enough kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I guess there's another question about balance. Like, how do we express to our kids that school and academics are important without them tying that to any kind of self-worth?
I think that a lot of people in our generation are the same that way, right? We have this, parents thought that, the more pressure, the better. And now we know that if we're putting on so much pressure that we're activating that stress response, then we're not in any kind of learning brain. And having the kid know that there are expectations around how we pay attention to study, but at the end of the day, being realistic about whether this one test is going to make and break whether you become, a doctor later on is probably just not a realistic thing. So I think just consistently having an expectation that they're doing their best and they're being diligent around their schoolwork. And at the end of the day, if you know those things, then that's the bottom line, not the letter grade.
Right. Yeah. Like, I want to be able to express to Harrison, like, this test, this school project, this whatever, it's important. But at the same time, I want him to know that regardless of a grade, like, we love him just the same.
I think that comes from like not a message, like, but the culture of the family. I think that you are probably modeling that reality to your everyday parenting.
Yeah, in other ways.
Like really being present when he's proud of something, or showing him his own worth and value through your eyes. So telling him what you saw that was really good about his soccer game, or how what a great teammate he is, or how supportive he is to that kid who fell on the field. So just building that self-image throughout the parenting interactions. At the same time, it is not going to be perfect. We are going to give a message that we look back on and say, that wasn't great. But we also have to remind ourselves that just like these humans are growing and developing, we are too. It's different, but it's not that different in terms of this evolution. And as parents, there's never been a time where we had more access to information about what to do, totally. Right? But also all the things that we're doing wrong. And we can get really bogged down with the idea that, oh, like I've been doing that wrong all along. Like it's not too late, because chances are there's been, many other things that have offset that you were doing the way that made sense for that kid. So, and there's not only one way. It needs to be individualized based on the needs of the kid. And I'm a firm believer that you know what your kid needs more than anybody else.
For sure. Well, that's a good mindset shift for me to have, that it's not just, a phrase or a sentence or saying, one right thing at the right time. It's that consistent environment of showing him that he's loved and supported. And
my older child, Maya, she has this like test anxiety. So she goes out into the day of a test, I'll make sure, as she's going out the door, to say, you studied. You did your best. It is what it is.
Yeah.
Now, there's lots of things that we can do home here if it doesn't go well, but just be present, do your best, check your answers, and then leave it where it is. And knowing that she has that like solid response when she comes home means a lot. And I think it just takes the pressure off that she is in the right mindset to tackle that test on any given day.
Nicole, what resources or other tools are available out there for parents and kids to address back to school stress?
If the school has their own parents' Facebook page, that's an excellent resource. I cannot tell you how many times I've flipped on Facebook at 10 p.m. and there's a message from some amazing parent down the street saying, don't forget, tomorrow is pizza day at the school. And I'm like, okay, yes, thank you, parent, who decided that they had the capacity tonight to contribute to this. So that can be a nice, just little resource to back you up as a parent and your kid up. And then I think what I've implemented, and it's been really hard, and some months it hasn't gotten done, but getting a big calendar and everybody has a color about when is cheerleading and when is soccer and when is funny hair day, which is tomorrow at my kid's school, is a huge visual representation for everyone. And now my older daughter especially, she'll tell me, Mom, tomorrow is pink hair day. And my son Noah will also say, Mom, it's show and share tomorrow at before and after school care. So just having a big calendar, if you can get it done towards the beginning of the month or the second week of the month, whatever you can manage. And if there's a blank month in there and you just rely on flying by the seat of your pants, that's okay too.
Yeah, it's such a helpful tool.
Yeah, if they go to school and they don't have pizza money, they'll probably survive, Yeah.
I don't know if I would.
Oh, one more thing I was going to say about this resource piece or tool is we've implemented a family meeting once a month, sort of just look ahead into the month and what we have going on, and my partner and I like decide sort of who's going to do pickups for the extracurriculars and sort of what each week looks like. And the kids sort of pick up their pieces in that too. So just having an open dialogue and, a bit more of a structured time around that. There's also amazing phone apps that are made for this sort of thing. So,
are there any like proactive measures that parents can take to kind of help out with like a smooth transition from summer break to the school routine?
Along with the things I've mentioned, I think sometimes if you know that your kid struggles with transitions specifically, it might be a good idea having the kid responded to as consistently as possible. So they spend a lot of time with their teachers. So having that teacher know a little bit about what your responses are, what really works for your kid. Well, there's usually an opportunity within the first week of school to have a little meeting with the teacher and get that relationship started. So passing on anything that's helpful at home if you know that that's a thing. There's going to be opportunities in the summer that will mimic what some of the back to school routine looks like. So seizing those opportunities. Like if there's a summer camp the kid's going to, they're going to need a lunch, get them involved in packing and prepping for those things. So just look for little opportunities to start that transition.
Yeah, and build those skills.
Yeah, totally.
Well, thank you, Nicole. This has been amazing. Can you provide any, final tips or advice for parents to effectively manage back to school stress and, promote overall well-being?
Be kind to yourself and your kids about this, and teach them to be kind to themselves, because we're not going to get anything in life right 100% of the time. Keep in the back of your mind that we just got to do it like right 30% of the time.
Yeah,
and
30%. Love that.
Maybe don't tell your kids that yet, because they probably want more than 30% on their math
of course.
test. But yeah. And then knowing that you're learning today and even if it doesn't go the way you wanted it, tomorrow is a new opportunity to challenge yourself to make it just a little bit better.
You've been listening to Living Fully, a Calgary Counseling Center podcast. Thank you for tuning in. This episode was produced by Nick here, Louisa Campos, and by me, Katherine Hurtig. A special thanks to Nicole Ward. To stay up to date on our latest episodes, be sure to subscribe. We're available in your favorite podcast app. Living Fully is a production of Calgary Counseling Center and recorded in Calgary on Treaty 7 territory. Living Fully podcast is not a substitute or alternative for professional care or treatment. If you're in Alberta and need help, please go to calgarycounseling.com or counselingalberta.com. For help across Canada and the United States, call 211. If you are outside of Canada and the US, seek help from your general medical practitioner.